In Peru, the Constitutional Court granted pardon to former President Alberto Fujimori on alleged humanitarian grounds. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development warned that conflict in Ukraine will reduce global economic growth and increase inflation. In Africa, the increase of fuel, grains, and fertilizers prices reflects the impact of the Ukraine crisis. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada from the TeleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And now we begin this news brief. In Peru, the Constitutional Court declared the habeas corpus case that reinstated the pardon granted to former President Alberto Fujimori to be well-founded. The legal instance approved the release for prison of former President Alberto Fujimori based on the presidential pardon granted in his favor in 2017, citing alleged humanitarian reasons. The measure granted by then President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski was annulled in 2018, ordering Fujimori's capture and subsequent imprisonment. The former president is serving a 25-year prison sentence for crimes against humanity for the massacres in Barrios Altos and La Cantuta in 1991. In Argentina, the government is waiting for the Senate to vote on the approval of the refinancing agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Gabriela Cerruti, the spokesperson for the presidency, thanked on behalf of the national government the members of Congress who made an effort to move forward with the debates. Cerruti expressed that the executive branch is still waiting for the parliament to convert the agreement with the IMF into a law that will benefit the country's economy. Meanwhile, the legislative palace is under protection in an attempt to avoid incidents such as in the Senate's last debate, where the office of Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was vandalized. In this context, the IMF indicated that social and political support is key to guarantee the success of the agreement reached with the Argentine government on the refinancing of the $45 billion debt acquired by the Macri's administration, with which it will avoid the default and attempt to curb runaway inflation of more than 50% per year. IMF representatives made the statement at a time when some sectors of Buenos Aires government expressed their reservations about the agreement, while at the same time, social sectors are mobilizing to express their discontent with the agreement and demand an increase in social programs to mitigate the impact of inflation. In Brazil, popular movements will take to the streets this Thursday in at least 21 cities to protest against the risk of evictions. The campaign, called Zero Evictions, seeks to fight for the extension of the argument of non-compliance with the fundamental precept, granted in June 2021 by the Federal Supreme Court. This measure, in place until March 31st, protected thousands of rural and urban families during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a report published by the organization, more than 132,000 families are currently threatened with eviction in Brazil. This is a 602% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. And Colombian senator asks Iván Duque's government to explain if it's using the country to store nuclear or biological weapons. Through Twitter, Senator Iván Cepeda published the formal request where he asked the president to clarify if he planned to use Colombian territory to store nuclear and biological material coming from the United States. This request came after Iván Duque expressed to a local media that Colombia could install U.S. equipment that might be useful in case of a supposed risk situation. Duque's position is in line with the U.S. President Joe Biden's intention to designate Colombia as NATO's main ally in the region. In Honduras, the defense of former President Juan Orlando Hernández will appeal the decision to extradite him to the U.S. after the charges of drug trafficking. The defense team of the former president, whose extradition to the United States was granted on Wednesday by a magistrate of the Supreme Court of Justice, ratified on Thursday that they will file an appeal to the court. Attorney Felix Avila, who is part of the defense, declared that the measure will be filed as established in the law, considering the decision as an error of the judicial power. He also expressed there is a decision of a judge that the defense will respect. But if mistakes were previously made in the extradition of persons, it is time to rectify them. And the public transport strike is underway in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to reject the wave of violence and kidnappings. The secretary of Haiti's Association of Owners and Drivers, Mehu Changyo, said the strike begins this Thursday, March 17th to Sunday, March 20th, to demand effective actions from the state to protect transporters and passengers. Changyo specified that the strike is the only way drivers have to resist the situation, and if nothing is done in the next few days, the strike will go national. New economic actors continue to grow in Cuba. The Caribbean island already has more than 2,000 micro, small and medium-sized private enterprises and 49 state-owned organizations. From Havana, our correspondent Fabiola Lopez tells us more details.
This is perhaps one of the most magical places in Havana.
¿Y qué me dicen del área de los simuladores? Ya saben que les permitirán viajar en tren.
Here you can find the unimaginable under the maxim that fun is serious business. Talking trees, screaming monkeys, augmented reality, robotics, cyber cafes, or a 12D cinema to experience crazy sensations. The Finca de los Monos Technology Palace is one of the local development projects managed by Cinesoft Recreation, one of the 3 small and medium-sized enterprises created by the socialist state-owned company Cinesoft.
Medium and small-sized enterprises are born free. That is, they have a system of ownership relationship with the company that creates them, but they're very free at the time of their management. Therefore, they are born with the application of new salary systems. They're born with new purchase and sale relationships with other actors of the economic. They are born with facilities for exporting and importing, and they are born, above all, with the possibility of a more participative management of their employees.
Spiral Solutions is one of the new private ventures that now has the possibility of working in alliance with the state-owned company Cinesoft.
Today we have a framework contracts with Cinesoft for the development, maintenance and repair of certain technological equipment, where we could not only give maintenance and repair to those that already exist and that at a given time may be obsolete, but also develop new solutions and modify solutions that already exist and that technologically do not have Cuban sovereignty because they are solutions that have technical assistance from abroad.
With the creation of the state-owned small and medium-sized enterprise EduMedia, which spun off from Cinesoft to manage audiovisual resources and informative and cultural software, Giselle Acosta is making her debut as an entrepreneur. She says that in a short time she has learned that you can have all the money in the world, but if the human capital is not adequate, the company will not be successful.
Another thing I have learned is the issue of customers. I think we have been working in terms of the company and not focus on the customer. And to be able to put a product, a service in a market where there is some competition, you have to think about the customer. When you manage to identify that gap and manage to satisfy that customer with quality, then you can also succeed in your process as an entrepreneur.
The government calls for increasing the presence of the non-state sector in exports, but the road does not seem to be smooth. One of the partners of the successful private small and medium-sized enterprise Guajiritos LLC, commercial partners of 70% of the travel agencies of the Ministry of Tourism in Cuba, assures that obstacles still remain.
The country's government is really close to what Cuba needs. There is a kind of intermediate layer that wants changes but does not know how to do it. The problem is when it is directed to direct. You have to be an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur takes risks. The entrepreneur practically does not sleep. He only thinks about the company, and as they are not entrepreneurs, it is difficult for them to change, and they get used to a way of working that they have been doing for 30 years. And those are the things that basically, I think, are stopping a product chain that we could have much better.
Experts agree that the challenge of the socialist state enterprise in Cuba is to become the locomotive of the national economy, not just a slogan, but the result of a truly efficient enterprise that complements the daily economy, that energizes the life of the Cuban people, that achieves an effective productive chain between the most diverse economic actors.
Fabiola Lopez, TeleSUR, La Habana.
Thank you, Fabiola, for this report, and we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. International organizations warn that the conflict in Ukraine will reduce global economic growth and increase inflation. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development noted that a first estimate of the war will cost the world at least 1 percentage point in its growth this year, and up to 1.4% to the Eurozone, as well as an addition of 2.5% to the already high global inflation. The Paris-based organization warned about the humanitarian consequences that the conflict could bring. Also lamented that just when the world economy seemed to be emerging from 2 years of crisis due to the pandemic, a war situation erupts and will have global effects.
The war is causing a strong supply shock, which adds to inflationary pressures and disruptions already caused by the COVID-19 crisis. There is the significant negative impact on confidence, which in turn will negatively impact private consumption and business investment decisions. There is the developing impact on energy and commodity supplies, as well as disruptions to international trade and financial markets.
And Russia revealed that Ukrainian Defense Ministry laboratories received $32 million in funding from Washington. The head of the radiological, chemical and biological section of the Russian, Igor Kirikov, said that laboratories of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry located in Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv and Kharkiv, were developing biological weapons. He said such laboratories were functioning under conditions stipulated in a contract signed by the U.S. Department of Defense and the Ukrainian Health Ministry. Kirillov presented documents that prove the Pentagon's direct involvement in financing military and biological projects in Ukraine. The government of Russia says chances of reaching an agreement with Ukraine on the Donbas conflict are very slim, despite negotiations underway between the parties involved. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that negotiations and delegations of both countries have not been able to reach an agreement on a number of issues. He said Russia has clearly expressed its conditions and is expecting a response from Kyiv. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that a negotiated solution of the ongoing conflict in the Donbas region will be the best desirable outcome. Russia is demanding a neutral status from Ukraine to prevent NATO from expanding to Eastern Europe to protect its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. On her part, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova urged the United Nations organization to adopt an objective and impartial position on the situation in Ukraine. Zakharova said the West reacts indifferently to the atrocities committed by Kyiv against civilians in the Donbas region, specifically in the bombing of Donetsk on March 14th. Zakharova labeled the event as a terrorist action and also said that the Kremlin will do everything possible to ensure that the crimes of the Ukrainian government against humanity do not go unpunished. And Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko denounced Ukraine for ballistic missile attacks against his nation. Lukashenko assured that the military forces in Minsk managed to shoot down 2 Toksha-U missiles that were heading for the Belarusian territory. The president warned Kyiv that if it continues with its provocations against the republic, he will be forced to respond. However, the Belarus president said that he did not expect to engage in a military conflict with Ukraine. He noted that Russia will not lose in the conflict against Ukraine and claimed that the West will not succeed in bringing Minsk into the situation. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. From airlines to Nigeria to shoppers in Malawi, Africans are fleeing the impact of the Ukraine crisis in wrenching increases in the price of fuel, grains and fertilizers. Global oil prices scaled decade-long highs for more than $100 a barrel shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, inflicting a hefty blow to many businesses south of the Sahara. Both Ukraine and Russia are also major suppliers of wheat and other cereals to Africa, while Russia is a key producer of fertilizer. The impact of the war and the West's sanctions against the Kremlin are already starting to translate into higher prices for farm inputs and imported grain.
Cost of production, it has increased immensely. So they have to come together and also increase the price of bread by 40% to what it was before.
Within a month, it left that level to about 600 and something plus now. And so many industry is on diesel. Trucks that bring in food stuff from the north to the south are running on diesel. Even train runs on diesel.
The United Nations Security Council met on Thursday to discuss the Afghan crisis and approved a resolution that establishes a formal relationship with a country ruled by the Taliban, although the document fails to use such term. The Security Council voted the resolution, which only saw the abstention of Russia and attempts to secure the future presence of the United Nations in Afghanistan. The text presented by Norway modifies the multilateral organization's relations with Kabul after the Taliban movement came into power and have not designated a representative to the organization. In this context, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the Afghan population is facing one of the world's fastest growing humanitarian crises and stressed that he has plans to assist more than 2 million people in need in the country, but has only received 9% of the funds required for such effect. And Yemen called for economic aid to address the humanitarian crisis in the country after more than 7 years of war. Yemen's Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation said it hopes to boost collaboration with regional and international financial institutions to seek more support for the country's reconstruction and recovery programs. It also reported earlier this year that the conflict caused economic losses of $126 billion and inflation reached record levels, depreciating the national currency by more than 300%. Likewise, the domestic product fell by more than half during the period 2014 to 2020 because of the war. And on the occasion of the 11th year of the terrorist war imposed on Syria, Washington and its European allies announced their refusal to normalize relations with Damascus, as long as President Bashar al-Assad remains in power and as Damascus plans to regain its prominent position in the Arab world and in the regional and international levels. Let's see more details with our correspondent Hisham Wanos.
Washington, London, Paris, Berlin and Rome also assured not to lift the sanctions and not to contribute to the reconstructions of Syria, without first reaching a political solution that would lead to the departure from power of President al-Assad, a position that after 11 years of war and political, media and economic pressures cannot change the reality that Damascus, thanks to its firmness in the face of the Western terrorist onslaught, once again opens its doors to welcome its Arab brothers after almost a decade of rupture.
The strategic geographical location of Syria in the east of the Mediterranean makes it a meeting point between the three continents through which the commercial transit routes to and from the Gulf pass, an issue that condemns to failure all Western attempts to isolate this country and distance it from its Arab environment, especially neighboring countries such as Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and the other countries east of the Mediterranean.
The White House's attempts to politically and economically isolate Syria in order to bend it to its will are not yielding results. Damascus, under the leadership of President-elect Bashar al-Assad, in addition to its Arab environment, is consolidating its relations with Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and other friendly countries. These strategic relations cover all areas: military, economic, industrial, commercial, scientific, and cultural. and demonstrate that there are other spaces in the world beyond the United States and the European Union.
Russia, like other countries friendly to Syria, spares no effort to help the Syrian government and people to overcome the effects of the Western blockade, not only through the urgent delivery of humanitarian air parcels, but also by increasing and consolidating bilateral cooperation in all areas in order to improve the Syrian economy in the interest of Syria and its friends and allies.
While internally, the Syrian government is sparing no efforts to guarantee the requirements of agricultural and industrial production and oil derivatives, and to start up production in medium and small projects. This, together with the humanitarian support offered by friendly countries, seeks to mitigate the impact of sanctions that Washington and its allies refuse to lift on the lives of Syrians, and makes it possible for the Syrian people to remain firm in the face of Western plans that threaten their sovereignty, independence, and right to self-determination.
TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.